After the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, it took less than 24 hours for the Democrats and their media to return to form. Not surprisingly, they are now almost in unison calling for the temperature to be turned down by ending the divisive rhetoric, implying that there is an equivalence between the two parties in terms of rhetoric. This included a speech on Sunday evening with President Joe Biden, the purveyor of some of the most vitriolic rhetoric and outright lies about Donald Trump and his supporters, listing past incidents of political violence, excluding the George Floyd riots and other left-wing rioting that was tolerated or even cheered on by Democrat politicians and media. As the Biden-Harris campaign's fortunes have continued to slide lately, they and their allies, in their desperation, intensified their claims that Trump would end democracy in the country if elected. Let's look at some of Joe Biden's tweets and statements leading up to the assassination attempt. On the 28th of June, Donald Trump is literally a threat to everything America stands for. 29th, Donald Trump will destroy our democracy. On July 2nd, a statement on the SCOTUS presidential immunity ruling. He's promising to be a dictator on day one. He was actually referring to executive orders on immigration in his first day in office, just like Joe Biden did. Calling for our Constitution to be terminated, that's not true. Promising a bloodbath if he loses. He used that term in reference to an economic bloodbath that would occur if Joe Biden were reelected. And just as a side note, in the immunity case, Justice Sotomayor wrote a hysterical dissent that seemed designed to support the Democrat narrative that Donald Trump will be unhinged and unaccountable if elected. More about the Supreme Court. Donald Trump will take away America as a free and democratic nation. Dictator. Project 2025 is run and paid for by Trump people. Trump's plan is actually called Agenda 47, which is available online and can be criticized, but curiously, Biden is choosing not to. Project 2025 was created by a think tank, and the playbook is about 900 pages long. There's no evidence that Trump plans to use it, and I'm pretty sure he hasn't read it and doesn't know what's in it. Regardless, they're mostly lying about what's in it. This is just a sample of his tweets. There are many more like this in a similar vein. In fact, these types of statements dominate Joe Biden's tweets. The narrative they seem to have settled on is that the divisive rhetoric started with Donald Trump. The New York Times ran a long editorial the week before the shooting about how dangerous Donald Trump is. It also extolled the virtues of previous Republican candidates in contrast to Trump. Quote, "The Republican Party once pursued electoral power in service to solutions for such problems, to building, quote, the shining city on a hill, end quote, as Ronald Reagan liked to say. Its vision of the United States, embodied in principled public servants like George H.W. Bush, John McCain, and Mitt Romney, was rooted in the values of freedom, sacrifice, individual responsibility, and the common good. Notice that they picked Republican candidates who lost presidential elections. Well, you can't love Republicans just when they lose. Their habit of vilifying Republicans as being fascists who were guilty of all sorts of isms and phobias goes back at least to the 1960s, but it intensified in the two elections with Barack Obama, in which the Republican nominees were John McCain and Mitt Romney, two of the most benign candidates to run in the past 50 years. Not exactly fire-breathing arch-conservatives. Here are two examples of what was being said about them when running against Barack Obama.
Lumping in McCain making racial ads when he attacks when he hasn't done it.
Look, I think that Donna's got a point here. Everybody knows he's black, but there has been a very intentional effort to paint him as somebody outside the mainstream other. He's not
mostly
one
below
of
the
us.
radar screen.
It's below the radar screen. I think the McCain campaign has been scrupulous about not directly saying it, but it's the subtext of this campaign. Everybody knows that. And when they send, there are certain kind of signals. As a native of the South, I can tell you when you see this Charlton Heston ad, the one, that's code for he's uppity. He ought to stay in his place. You know, everybody gets that. Who's from a Southern background. We all understand that. When McCain comes out and starts talking about affirmative action, I'm against quotas. We get what that's about. We understand where that's
George
coming
asking the
from.
question.
He was asked. Romney wants to he said in the first 100 days, he's going to let the big banks once again write their own rules. Unchain Wall Street. They're going to put you all back in chains.
Joe Biden, such a nice, civil man. Just as a side note, this is how you got Donald Trump. Left-wing press outlets are dutifully predicting the demise of the Republic if Donald Trump is elected, comparing him to Hitler. Here are two recent examples. Let me remind you of what happened last year when Ron DeSantis looked like the Republican frontrunner. Were the Democrats relieved that the Orange Hitler might lose his bid for the nomination? Well, not exactly. Ron DeSantis is more dangerous than Trump. More dangerous. Far more dangerous than Trump. Could be worse than Trump. Terrifying. Scarier. No one is more dangerous. Less bad for democracy than Trump. I guess that's how you rate Republican candidates, is how bad they are for democracy relative to each other. Hold on. Nikki Haley trumps Ron DeSantis, so to speak. She could be the most dangerous president of all. There is plenty to criticize about Donald Trump's statements and actions in the past, enough to make an argument against his election. But if you suggest he is just like Hitler, or that if he's elected it will be the last election ever held, you're not really saying much about the voters you're trying to reach. Just like the narrative that we almost lost our democracy on January 6th, believing it takes such profound ignorance of history and almost no understanding of how government works and really how the world works in general. It just blows the mind. If a majority of people end up believing these sorts of narratives, maybe we don't deserve a democracy, or maybe just they don't. I don't expect this lull in the rhetoric to last long. The media, especially, have dug themselves such a deep hole. Whether it's lying or a life of crime, it's difficult to just stop and admit you did something wrong and take the consequences. I expect every possible tactic to be used against Donald Trump between now and Election Day. If Donald Trump is elected, here's what the Democrats fear. Firstly, his administration could open the books in the executive agencies and reveal how the power of the government has been used to target political enemies and limit free speech. I expect a lot of document deleting and shredding to take place between Election Day and Inauguration Day if Trump is elected. Secondly, if Donald Trump is elected president and isn't Hitler and doesn't rule as a dictator and leaves office on schedule in 2029, where will their credibility stand? I think they'll do what they usually do, redefine the terms and change the subject. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the untrue and inflammatory statements will stop until the election. What do you think the chances of that are?
And the then president was asked, what do you think? He said, they're very fine people on both sides. He said, look, I'm not the guy that said, I want to be a dictator on day one.
But have you taken a step back and done a little soul searching on things that you may have said that could incite people who are not balanced?
Well, I don't think, look, how do you talk about the threat to democracy, which is real, when a president says things like he says? Do you just not say anything because it may incite somebody? Look, I have not engaged in that rhetoric. Now, my opponent is engaged in that rhetoric. He talks about there'll be a bloodbath if he loses.